Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on the book of Genesis.
Ooh, Genesis.
Yeah, one of those texts that just, echoes through history, book of beginnings,
Right.
a foundational story, for so much of how we understand the world, humanity, our relationship with God.
It's amazing to me how these ancient stories still resonate with us, today.
Yeah,
Genesis lays out some really big questions, about who we are, where we come from, what our purpose is.
it does. And to kind of help us, navigate this epic narrative,
Yeah,
we've broken it down into some key parts.
right.
Primeval history, where we get that creation account, the Garden of Eden, the fall.
Right, all those foundational stories.
Yeah, and then we move into patriarchal history, focusing on, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, those figures that really shaped the destiny of a nation.
And woven through it all, you have this thread of God's sovereignty, his power and authority over all creation, and yet also this incredible patience and love for humanity, even when we mess up.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning.
Right.
Genesis opens with that incredibly evocative creation story.
It's a powerful one.
It's not just about what God creates,
Right.
but how he creates
Yeah.
this idea of speaking things into existence.
It's an image of pure power, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let there be light, and boom, there's light.
Yeah.
It establishes God as the ultimate creator,
Right.
the one who brings order out of chaos, who sets the universe in motion with just his words.
And it's so deliberate.
Yeah.
And intentional, each day built on the last light, then the separation of the sky and water, then land and plants, then the sun, moon, and stars,
Just very organized.
then the creatures of the sea and the sky, and finally on the sixth day, land, animals, and humanity.
And I think what's so fascinating is the way Genesis emphasizes the goodness of creation. After each day, we hear that refrain.
Yeah,
And God saw that it was good.
Right.
It's like this cosmic affirmation, this
Yeah.
declaration that the world as God created it is inherently good, beautiful, full of life.
and then comes day 7, the Sabbath.
Ah, yes.
Now, a lot of people, I think, see this as just a day of rest,
Yeah,
but there's something deeper going on here, right?
absolutely.
Right.
The Sabbath isn't just about taking a break.
Right.
It's about imitating God. If God, the creator of the universe, rested on the seventh day, then maybe more created in his image,
Yeah.
are also meant to have that rhythm of
Yeah.
work and rest.
That's a good point.
It's a reminder that, we're not meant to be constantly striving, producing, achieving.
Yeah.
We need to build those moments of stillness and reflection into our lives.
It makes the Sabbath less about a legalistic rule
Right.
and more about aligning ourselves with the rhythms of creation,
Yeah,
recognizing our limits, and acknowledging what even God rested.
exactly. And I think that connection to the divine is even more pronounced when we consider the creation of humanity. We're not just another creature
Right.
on the sixth day.
Yeah.
We're made in God's image, which sets us apart in a very profound way.
So what does that even mean?
Right.
To be made in the image of God?
Yeah.
Does it mean we look like him?
Right.
Or that we have the same abilities as him?
Good question.
I've always wondered about that.
It's one of the most debated concepts in theology,
Yeah.
but it's crucial to understanding our relationship with God.
Yeah.
The image of God doesn't necessarily refer to physical appearance,
Okay.
but to something much deeper. It suggests we share certain qualities with God.
Okay.
Things like reason, creativity,
Mhm.
a moral conscience,
Right.
and perhaps most importantly, the capacity for a relationship with him.
So unlike the animals,
Right.
we're not just driven by instinct. We have the ability to think, to create, to make choices,
Exactly.
and to connect with our Creator on a personal level.
Precisely. And that capacity for relationship is beautifully illustrated in
Yeah.
the Garden of Eden. It's
Right.
this picture of paradise.
Yeah.
A perfect harmony between God and humanity. They walk together in the cool of the day. They communicate freely.
Right.
There's no shame, no fear, no separation.
It's like this idyllic image of what was intended for us.
Right.
This perfect communion with God and with creation.
It is, and it really highlights the tragedy of what comes next, the fall, the brokenness, the separation that enters the world through human disobedience.
Yeah.
But even in the midst of that tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
we see glimpses of God's grace
Right.
and his relentless pursuit of humanity.
Okay, so let's talk about the forbidden fruit
Okay,
and that infamous serpent.
that tricky servant.
Why was this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, off limits?
It's interesting. The forbidden tree doesn't represent knowledge itself being bad.
Right.
It's more about respecting God's boundaries acknowledging that he ultimately defines good and evil.
So it's not about the fruit itself,
Right.
but about the choice they made.
Exactly.
It's about trust obedience, recognizing that we're not the ultimate authority.
Exactly. And you see that in how the serpent tempts Eve.
Yeah.
He twists God's words,
Right.
sows those seeds of doubt, appeals to her pride and desire for autonomy.
It's like that classic line,
Yeah.
did God really say?
Right.
The serpent doesn't outright deny God?
He just subtly undermines his authority.
Yeah, and the consequences of that choice are immediate and devastating.
Theo.
Adam and Eve experience shame, fear, they hide from God.
That's right.
That perfect harmony in the garden is shattered.
It is.
And the serpent, what's its deal? Is it just a talking snake, or is there something more symbolic going on?
Well, the serpent is often interpreted as representing Satan,
Okay.
the embodiment of temptation and rebellion against God.
Right.
It's a reminder that there are spiritual forces at work in the world seeking to pull us away from God's truth.
So even in this idyllic paradise,
Right.
there's this undercurrent of spiritual warfare,
That's right.
this battle for our hearts and minds. That's pretty intense.
It is. And then you have the curses that God pronounces.
Right.
On the serpent, on Adam and Eve, and even on the ground itself. It's like this ripple effect of brokenness that just spreads throughout creation.
Okay, let's unpack these curses a bit. What do they tell us about the nature of sin and its consequences?
Well, the curses highlight the disruption of relationships on multiple levels.
Okay.
The relationship between humans and God is fractured.
Yeah.
There's now this distance, this fear, this sense of separation.
It's like they've lost that intimacy,
Exactly.
that easy access to God they had in the garden.
Exactly. And the relationship between man and woman is also distorted.
Mm-hmm.
We see this in the pain of childbirth and the power dynamics that emerge between genders.
So sin doesn't just affect our relationship with God, it impacts all of our relationships.
That's right.
It brings conflict, pain, and brokenness into every sphere of life.
Precisely. And even the relationship between humanity and nature is affected.
Wow.
The ground as cursed work becomes toilsome, and we experience the harsh realities of a fallen world.
It's like this paradise, this perfect harmony is shattered into a million pieces.
It is.
And the expulsion from Eden, the guarding of the tree of life, it's also symbolic, isn't it?
It is. The expulsion represents our separation from God, a loss of that intimate connection we were created for.
Right.
And the guarding of the tree of life symbolizes the loss of immortality, the entry of death to the human experience.
Okay, so we've got this foundational story, this paradigm shift from paradise to fallenness.
Right.
And then Genesis doesn't waste any time, does it? We jump right into the story of Cain and Abel, the first murder.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that sin has real consequences, and those consequences can be devastating.
Right.
Jealousy, anger, resentment.
Yeah.
These emotions can fester in our hearts and lead to horrific acts.
And from there, it seems like humanity keeps going downhill. We get the genealogy of Adam, this spreading wickedness, the sons of God intermingling with humans. It's all a bit cryptic and unsettling, isn't it?
It is, and there are many interpretations of who these sons of God were.
Right.
Some believe they were fallen angels, others see them as powerful human rulers. But regardless of the specific interpretation, the point is clear.
Okay.
Sin is rampant, and the world is becoming increasingly corrupt.
And that brings us to the flood.
Yeah.
It's this massive cataclysmic event that wipes out almost all life on Earth. Talk about a reset button.
It is a reset in a sense, but it's also a judgment, a consequence of human wickedness reaching a point where God says is enough.
Right.
But even in his judgment, we see his mercy. He spares Noah and his family, offering them a chance for a new beginning.
And there's that covenant again. God makes a promise to Noah, symbolized by the rainbow,
Right.
that he will never again destroy the earth by flood. It's like a glimmer of hope in the midst of all this devastation.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even when we deserve judgment, God's love and faithfulness endure. He's always offering us another chance, another opportunity to turn back to him.
But then we get the Tower of Babel, and it seems like humanity is falling back into those same patterns of pride and rebellion.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
The Tower of Babel symbolizes the human desire for autonomy.
Right.
For self-sufficiency, for reaching heaven on our own terms. It's a rejection of God's authority and a prideful attempt to make a name for ourselves.
So it's not just about a literal tower.
Right.
It's about that human tendency to build our own kingdoms, our own systems, our own ways of reaching God.
Exactly.
Instead of submitting to his plan, it's like we're constantly trying to climb our way to heaven instead of acknowledging that we need a savior.
You've hit the nail on the head. And the result of that pride?
Yeah.
Confusion, scattering, a breakdown of communication and unity. It's a reminder that apart from God, our efforts to reach heaven are ultimately futile. We can't save ourselves.
So we've gone from creation to fall to judgment to this new beginning with Noah that seems to be heading down a similar path. Where does God take us from here?
Well, this is where Genesis shifts gears. We move from universal human history to the story of a particular people,
Okay.
a chosen family through whom God will work out his redemptive plan.
Right.
We're entering the patriarchal history, and it all begins with a man named Abram.
Abraham, now that's a name that echoes through history. The father of many nations, the man of faith, the one who almost sacrificed his son. His story is full of drama and significance.
Abraham's story is pivotal. It marks a turning point in God's plan. He chooses this man, Abram, later renamed Abraham,
Right.
and makes him a staggering promise to make his descendants into a great nation, to bless them and make his name great.
And it all starts with a simple command. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Just pack up and go based on faith. That's a bold move, both for Abraham and for God.
It is, and it speaks to the importance of faith and obedience in our relationship with God. Abraham doesn't argue, he doesn't question.
Yeah.
He simply trusts and obeys, and that act of faith becomes the foundation for everything that follows.
So Abraham sets off on this journey, and God establishes a covenant with him, a binding agreement with promises of land descendants and blessing. It's like the blueprint for the future nation of Israel.
Exactly, and this covenant is central to understanding God's relationship with his chosen people. It's not just about Abraham, it's about the generations that will come after him. It's about a people set apart for a special purpose,
Right.
a people through whom God will bless the entire world.
But it's not all smooth sailing for Abraham, is it? There's drama with Hagar and Ishmael, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and then that incredibly intense story of the binding of Isaac. God asks Abraham to sacrifice his only son, the son of promise. I mean, how do you even process something like that?
It's a deeply disturbing story, no doubt, and it raises profound questions about faith, obedience, and the nature of God, but it's also a story about provision,
Okay.
about God ultimately providing a substitute for Isaac.
So it's not about child sacrifice. It's about pointing towards a greater truth,
Exactly.
a deeper love, a God who is willing to give everything for the sake of humanity.
Exactly, and it foreshadows God's ultimate sacrifice of his own son Jesus on the cross. It's through Abraham's willingness to obey, even in the face of the unimaginable, that we see the depth of his faith and the trustworthiness of God's promises.
And the story continues, right? We've got Isaac, then Jacob with his 12 sons, all these stories of family rivalry, trickery, and yet through it all, God's faithfulness to his promises shines through.
It does. Jacob's story is particularly fascinating. His wrestling match with God, his name change to Israel.
Right.
It speaks to the struggles we all face, the wrestling with faith, the transformation that comes through encountering the divine.
And then we come to Joseph, the dreamer, the betrayed brother, the one who rises to power in Egypt. His story is like something out of a Hollywood movie. It really is. It's got betrayal, intrigue, forgiveness, all the elements of a great story, but it's also a powerful illustration of God's providence, how he works behind the scenes, even in the midst of difficult circumstances.
Yeah, it's like that saying, what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good.
Yeah.
Joseph's story is a perfect example of that. His brothers sell him into slavery, but through a series of twists and turns, he ends up saving Egypt from famine and ultimately reconciling with his family.
It reminds us that even when we can't see it, God is at work.
He is.
He's weaving together this tapestry of redemption,
Yeah.
using even the most difficult experiences for his purposes.
And that theme of redemption is so central to the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
From the fall of humanity in Eden to the hope of a new beginning with Abraham and his descendants, we see this constant tension between brokenness and restoration, judgment, and grace.
So if we were to sum up, the major themes of Genesis, what would you say, what are the key takeaways for our listener today?
Well, first and foremost, Genesis establishes God as the creator,
Right.
the sovereign ruler over all.
Yeah.
He is the one who speaks things into existence, who sets the order of the universe,
Right.
who establishes the boundaries between good and evil.
And yet, despite his power and authority, we also see his heart for humanity,
We do.
his desire for relationship with us,
Yeah.
his willingness to pursue us, even when we turn away.
Absolutely, and that pursuit is evident in his covenants and the promises he makes to Noah, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob.
Right.
These covenants aren't just contracts, they're expressions of God's faithfulness,
Right.
his commitment to his people, his plan to bless the world through them.
But as we've seen, that blessing doesn't come without struggle. Sin enters the world, and with it all the brokenness, pain, and separation we experience.
That's right, the fall isn't just a story from the past. It's a reality that continues to shape our lives today. We're all fallen, broken, in need of redemption.
Yeah.
And that redemption, that restoration of our relationship with God is ultimately found in Jesus Christ.
So Genesis isn't just a book of beginnings.
Right.
It's a book that points us toward the one who makes all things new.
It certainly is. And as you delve into the rest of Scripture, you'll see how the themes of creation, fall, covenant, and redemption continue to unfold,
Right.
culminating in the ultimate story of God's love and redemption through Jesus.
Wow, what a journey. It's amazing how much depth and richness are packed into these ancient stories.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, how does understanding Genesis, this foundational text, affect our understanding of who God is and our place in the world?
That's a great question, and one that deserves careful reflection. I'd encourage you, dear listener, to pick up a copy of Genesis and read it for yourself. Let these stories challenge you, inspire you, and draw you closer to the heart of God.
Absolutely. And until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep seeking truth. We'll see you on our next deep dive.